Good afternoon. I'm Andy Rotherham. I'm a co-founder and partner of Bellwether Education. We work around the country, but we are extremely proud to have an office right here in DC in the Shaw neighborhood and be part of this community here. And it's a pleasure to be here to moderate this discussion and welcome you this morning and spend some time with Kaya. This was not actually an easy event for me to make, just logistically. It involved red eyes and other things, but when they asked, there was absolutely no way I wasn't going to do it. That's the amount of respect I have for Kaya. So I'm very glad to be here. In fact, I wanted to bring my kids so they could experience this. They happen to be off of school today, but as anyone who has 9-year-old twins would understand, that stuff doesn't always, best laid plans. We'll leave it at that. But that's how much respect that I have for Kaya. She and I have both been at this latest round of the historic effort to try to improve our schools, this latest version of it since before it was cool. And I think I've both learned a lot along the way. But her fierce urgency, her deep commitment, her sense of the long game, and her real sense of the operational realities of running school districts and how those things have to be tackled, have to be improved, but the real things that school districts do every day that matter to children and families is just unparalleled in our sector. And Kaya also passes what I call the Saturday night test, which is this a person you would want to have in your home on Saturday night? And she passes that with flying colors because in addition to just being an amazing leader, an amazing educator, she's also just a lot of fun. And I say all that because I do respect her deeply, and also usually when you moderate, it's all even-handed. I just wanted to make sure I was pretty clear about my bias here up front, just to put it out there. So we have a video we're going to watch. Sonia is then going to say a few words, and then we're going to get into the discussion, which will involve some conversation. Kaya and I are going to have a conversation, and then we're going to bring in the audience with questions, because I know a lot of you have questions, because a few of you have already buttonholed me in the hallway, and so I'm sure that there's a lot more. So we'll turn it over to the video, and then we'll be back up here in a moment.
Just thinking back to the school system when I first came in, it was kind of a hodgepodge of old ideas and outdated strategies, and I couldn't identify a direction.
I didn't feel very welcome. I didn't know what was going on in the school building.
I stepped into the #1 role at a time where teacher morale was low. The community was coming off of a number of school closings, and there was a lot of really negative change happening. And I had to figure out a way to keep the momentum going so that we could continue really rapid change, but do it in a way that the community and our employees were with us and not against us. So we use the term human capital as shorthand for great people.
So when I think about human capital, I think about the opportunities we have to grow our own talent, the opportunities we have to create professional growth and really professionalize education.
DCPS has done a great job in making sure that teachers have the opportunity to grow, and that teachers, when they're working hard, they're compensated for that work, they're recognized for that work, and they also have leadership opportunities as well.
We've been so busy making excuses for our young people that we've tended to set the bar low, and that's garbage, frankly. We know that if we set the bar high, they'll rise to it.
There are curricular resources that are driving rigor of the content that every student is exposed to. When I first started teaching, we had a set of textbooks. I didn't even have enough of those, and I literally was going kind of page to page versus having some smart, cohesive sequence of standards that I'm teaching that scaffold and build student learning.
I know I'm being challenged when I feel that I got to push harder.
I always say we are DCPS and we can do this, but we can't do it alone. It takes partnership with our stakeholders, our most important people, our students, our families, and our community members.
The fact that the teachers and the administration of DCPS care about every student is huge comfort to parents. And I believe that Kaya Henderson honestly believes that parent input is as valuable a tool for helping children succeed that there is.
I'm a firm believer in that it takes a village to raise a child.
And the school is now part of my village, has become. The teachers, the principal, Mr. Cartland, they've become part of my village.
Enrollment is up after 40 years of enrollment decline. Our graduation rates are up. Our national test scores are up. All of the indicators are pointing in the right direction. Student satisfaction is up. Teacher retention is up. And we're no longer a broken school district.
But by virtually every measure, DC has improved faster than any other city in the nation. And the sense of momentum, the hope, the pride, the optimism that exists simply would have been impossible to think about 10 or 15 or 20 years ago.
Now I feel like there's a very clear vision for where we're going and what we're doing. I feel like there's a positive energy about what's been accomplished, about the trajectory that our students are on, that our teachers are on.
5 years from now, my major desire, my wish is to become a lawyer, but I think I'm gonna be ready. I'm gonna be ready.
And with DCPS, I've seen over the last 5 years a metamorphosis of trust and transparency.
So 5 years ago, I think nobody would have been able to predict how much progress we've made in such a short amount of time. I want us to be the national model for what a great urban education looks like in America.
So I actually have a real easy job today, because introducing Kaya is for me really like a respite from normally what I get to do. And my name is Sonia Santelises, I should say that, and I head up K-12 policy and practice for the Education Trust. We're an advocacy organization that focuses on improving educational outcomes for low-income kids and kids of color. And part of why I say that is because if there were someone who embodied the power of what we believe all children should be able to do, are entitled, the kind of education they're entitled to have, I could not think of a better advocate than Kaya Henderson. And it is no surprise to me, and I was joking to her, with her ahead of time, like, I should have known you were the daughter of a principal. And that just makes sense to me. She's the daughter of the youngest African-American principal period, in Yonkers, New York. And she has clearly done her mother proud and continues really to drive home what oftentimes gets confusing in a national narrative that seems to be picking up steam around the challenges of poverty and kind of one-word answers, and if we just do this. And one of the litmus tests that I have kind of brought to this work over the course of the years is anybody who identifies only with one camp amongst a field of camps, I tend not to trust as much, because I don't think they know the real work. And with Kaya, what I love is, and she'll tell you on the side, probably on a Saturday night at Andy's for dinner, that she takes heat from all sides because you can't put her in a box, right? In so many ways, she's absolutely what a lot of people call reformer. And I put that in quotes because everybody has different ways they do that. And so yes, she absolutely ushered in brilliantly a landmark contract in DC public schools at a time when it was unheard of, not only in the city, but in the country. She absolutely believes in wide varieties of educational options for kids, regardless of the title of it, be it charter, traditional, neighborhood, crosstown. But she also understands that it is not just about what you do in the policy realm, but that everything she does for kids, in the name of kids, she judges by the impact it has on young people. And she is not only confident in that driving force, but she's also confident in her knowledge of what makes schools tick. And it was very interesting because our organization, like a lot of organizations in this town, a couple of weeks ago, God, it seems like a couple months ago now, when NAEP data came out, everyone was crunching and seeing and where is it? And as a former district leader myself, one of the things that was really interesting that I always tell people about Kaya, I said, yeah, everybody's jumping on the bandwagon now. Everybody likes it now that the data is going up. But I remember her comments when the data wasn't up yet, when they were flat and people were saying, well, is reform working? Is what you're doing working? And I remember the quote, not verbatim, but I remember the spirit of the quote in that interview when she said, we are moving full steam ahead. We have confidence in what we're doing. We're looking at changing the core of what kids have experiences doing, the rigor of the curriculum, but also the enrichment of their experiences. And I don't know of a lot of people who have the confidence to communicate that. Oftentimes you see leaders backpedaling. Well, we're gonna make some changes over here. We're gonna make some changes over there. And Kaya knew, and she had confidence in her people, her team. She's not a one-person show. Anybody who's met any team from DCPS, as I have, when she's not even in the room, it is clear that her vision is their vision, is the vision for schools. And there are not a lot of leaders in this country that do that. There are a lot of people who sit in her seat. There are not a lot of people who lead the way that she leads and who, again, judge everything by what kids know and are able to do and have exposure to. So I love the fact that I am trying to get in touch with her chief academic officer to ask him a question. He's like, sorry, Sonia, we're out here with second graders learning how to ride bicycles. And by the way, next week, I gotta be with the third graders who are learning how to swim. Because she's not in one policy box. She doesn't think it's one thing. She's looking at whole kids from whole communities, not broken kids who we somehow need to fix. And I will tell you, as somebody who is continually confronted with this picture of urban kids, of kids of color, of kids from low-income neighborhoods, as somehow an entity that just needs to be tinkered with, and if we could just make the kids right, everything would be okay. It is absolutely refreshing and invigorating to have someone who sits on the line every day and refuses to allow that narrative to be the driving force. That, for me, is the story that I am looking forward to hearing her tell today. So without further ado, a former middle school teacher, I also was a former middle school teacher, right? I have the pleasure of introducing again Andy, but also Kaya Henderson.
Thank you, Sonia. That was really lovely and true. Two things that you usually don't get in this town, and we got them both. All right, so let's just start. This is a 5-year anniversary celebration, and we're talking. There has been, the amount of change in 5 years. Sonia referenced it does seem like a long time since the NAEP wars broke out, but even longer. It's been 5 years. Talk to us about when you think about this. What are some of the biggest successes, and what are things that you still see as real challenges that need to be addressed?
Big successes that I'm still here. I never would have imagined that I would be here for 5 years. Many of you know that I was reluctant to take this role, but I'm really proud of what we've accomplished over 8.5 years total at DCPS, but over the last 5, we've really done some important things. I think I'm proud of the fact that our enrollment is increasing. I think that's actually the best barometer of the job that we're doing. When our stakeholders, parents, and community members vote with their feet and come to our schools, I think that is a huge sign of confidence. As I mentioned in the video, our graduation rates are up. Our retention rates are up, our test scores are up, and everything is going in the right direction. I think there's a narrative across this country that urban school districts are broken and can't be fixed. And I think I'm really proud of the fact that we are able to be a proof point for the nation and refute that. If urban school systems are broken, then we have consigned millions of kids across this country to no future. And I just sort of reject that notion, and I feel like we have to work differently, and we have to work smarter, and we have to be more creative. And I think we have been doing that in DCPS, and we're showing some very different results.
Okay, I want to come back to this district issue and that question, but sort of so staying on this, when you think of the levers and the things you've pulled, and there's been a variety of changes that have happened here around standards, around impact, around instruction, like what do you see as the levers that have really, in your view, have really driven change?
Yeah, so I think for DCPS, there's three things. We have a theory of action that says people, 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 right? The best people, the best teachers, the best principals. How do we get them? How do we grow them? How do we keep them? You know, rigorous academic content, and, you know, Sonia mentioned our academic team, which I'd say is the best in the business. And we're constantly asking, how do we help our young people struggle with more challenging work? And then I think the third piece is really around the engaging students and families. We know that in order to do this work, we have to do it with our family members, with our students. And so bringing them in as part of the solution has been kind of the way we think about the work. But it's not just what different has happened at DCPS. There's a whole constellation of things around DCPS that has enabled our success. And so people always say, well, what'd you do just in a nutshell? Somebody asked me yesterday, in a nutshell, what'd you do? Nutshell? How big is that nut? I think in addition to, you know, the big heavy lifts that we've made at DCPS, there are a whole set of things that have happened around us that have enabled our success. So we have political will that has provided us with cover for the interesting things that we have tried to do. We are on our third mayor who has really given us significant financial support. And to be very honest, I don't, you know, DC has experienced a tremendous run at financial stability and surplus, and those funds have been invested in education. You can't fix a broken system on the same dollars that you've been operating it on. You have to make some investments. And we're on our third mayor who has recognized that and continued the commitment to investing in public schools. I think that we have a council that has struggled initially to figure out what its role was going to be, but has found its way to supporting us and helping us make policies and laws that allow us to move faster. I think we have a community that frankly was fed up with the public school system and was willing to tolerate some very big changes and sort of demanded. I think you can't get to a different kind of school system unless the people are demanding something different. And so I think we'd hit a tipping point. And so there were a number of things that sort of all happened at the same time. And then the mayoral control happened in 2007. And a reporter asked me, you know, the other day, could you have done this with an elected school board? And, you know, to be very blunt, I told her, no, I don't think that there is any way that I could have done this if I had to convince a number of people every month or every, you know, quarter that these were the things that we had to do. I've been able to go straight to the mayor every Wednesday or whenever I need to text or call, say this is what we need to do and get the go-ahead. So I think there are things that you need to do within the district, but then I think there are a bunch of things that help set the conditions for you to be able to do the transformative work.
So I want to stay, one of the things I hope to do today is sort of tease out some broader lessons. Your point on school boards, is that a broader, do you think like we are just at a point where you need a different kind of accountability arrangement for adults and leaders, or are you making a more situational point around Washington, D.C.?
So I can only make a situational point around Washington, D.C. There are absolutely school boards that work very well with their superintendents and are moving forward interesting work. But I think in order to turn a district around, to take a district that really is broken. I mean, in 2007, we were the lowest performing school district in the country on the NAEP. And in 8 short years, we're now fastest improving. We made the greatest gains. And I don't think that you get to that through consensus. I think you've got to make some really hard decisions and be empowered to move quickly.
So how much on this issue of what you said in so many words was sometimes you have to break China so you can start to move forward, or break eggs to make an omelet? There's a million metaphors. how much of that sort of were you positioned, because you had a leader who preceded you, and Michelle, who just came in here, was very aggressive, had cover from the mayor, and really took on stuff that going back decades that had just been unaddressed. How much of that like set you up for success, and how much of that created challenges that you then had to deal with when you got into the chair?
Both and. I think, we wouldn't be where we are today if, and people sort of say Michelle, like I wasn't here with her, but we broke a lot of China together. And I think we would not be in the position where, I was able to take over in 2010 if we hadn't made some really fundamentally difficult and hard decisions. That being said, it also put me in a very challenging situation when I became chancellor, because change management is probably, or how you do things is probably as important as what you do. And you've got to have a clear barometer of how much change your people can take. If there's too much change, people become paralyzed, or they just give up on you. And I think we had ushered in a lot of change really quickly, and it was clear to me that people's tolerance for change was at a limit. And so I had to figure out a way to keep a sense of urgency and to keep us moving forward without like stroking people out, right? And so we had to think critically about how we introduce new things. The first thing that I did when I was chancellor was pull my academic team together after meeting with teachers all over the city, and teachers were saying, we know how you want us to teach through impact and the teaching and learning framework. We don't know what to teach because we don't have a curriculum. We need a standardized curriculum across the city. And I brought my academic team together and I said, all right, so what curriculum do we have? And they were like, huh, what? And I was like, what can we buy? And they were like, huh, what? And we called some folks and sort of said, all right, we want to put together a curriculum. And we embarked on a 3-year journey to develop our own curriculum that was aligned to the Common Core standards. And if we had simply said, okay, teachers, here's a new curriculum, go, right? It would have been mutiny on the bounty. But what we did was we said, we hear you teachers, you are asking for a new curriculum, so we're gonna work to put one together at your request. And we're gonna have you tell us how deep you want it to go or how shallow you want it to go, and we're gonna have you help us create it. And so we detailed our best teachers to help develop the curriculum, and we're gonna have you all deliver it to your colleagues and whatnot. And we're gonna do it over 3 years, and so managing the change, there are lots of school districts that in 3 years couldn't put a curriculum together from pre-K to 12th grade across a number of different subject areas, but we did it because we managed the change well. We did it with our teachers. And so I think I've been really cognizant of how you make big changes in ways that people can handle it, and not just handle it, but will embrace it and help move it forward.
Are there any other lessons from that? I mean, it was such an interesting situation. I mean, as you said, you were here, but you were also not Michelle. You have a different style. It was a different governance situation. Like, there's a through line, but there's a lot of discontinuity in there. Are there other, just personally in your journey, are there other leadership lessons that you sort of drew from that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest leadership lessons that I drew, which you can sort of see in stark contrast, were how we closed schools. So we did a round of closings in 2008 under Michelle, and then I did another round of closings in 2013, and they were very different experiences. In 2008, it was very contentious. A list kind of escaped DCPS headquarters, and people were screaming and hollering, and there were protests, and there were meetings, 26 of them all on one night when it snowed, and the mayor proclaimed that community engagement was overrated and let's just do this, and it was terrible. And it wasn't who I am as a person. I participated because that was how we were doing it. And when I got the chance to close schools, which nobody should get the chance to do, it's a wretched situation. But when I needed to make that same decision to reallocate resources across the district, I just determined that we could do it a different way, that we could do it with our community. And so we put out a proposal, and I said to my team, we'll do our best thinking. We'll take the data that we have, and we'll put out a proposal to the community of what we should close and why. and we'll ask them because they have some data that we don't have. So don't get married to the proposal, right? You know, we think we're super smart all up in 1200, but we have some data and our communities have other data. And when we put our two pieces of data together, we get to better answers. And we also get to co-ownership of the problem and of the solution. And so we did that with the community, and that was the same year that Chicago closed a number of schools and they had the great Chicago teacher strike. It was when Philadelphia also closed a bunch of schools and people were handcuffing themselves to the superintendent's office. And here we had a very non-dramatic experience closing schools because we did it with the community. And I think that strategy it just lent itself to my leadership style, which I think was different than Mayor Fenty's and Michelle's.
Yeah, you didn't even create a situation where anybody could come here and get themselves arrested. I think
No
there's some people who are
arrests.
still a little bitter about that. So before, I want to talk about the charters and some of the challenges. So before that, I want just, when you go to meetings like this, no one talks about like getting teachers on payroll, pre-screening for hires, like all these nuts and bolts that are essential to like operating a school district. What are some of the things you talked about? I think a lot of challenges that people who follow this would be aware of, and successes, impact, curriculum. Just what are other operational successes that have happened that people like don't talk about? We're not going to read about in the Washington Post, but in your view have been instrumental to some of the changes here.
I mean, data systems, right? We were talking earlier, and Dr. Drew Jarvis said, if you have data, you have power, right? If you know what's going on in your school district, then you can actually change things or you can reallocate resources. We didn't know what was going on in the place because there were 29 different data systems and none of them talked to each other. And even when we got to a handful, we weren't collecting the right data. It wasn't really focused on students, and we weren't asking ourselves the right questions. I kept saying every year, okay, this group comes and tells me every year how great their program is, but do we have anything to validate that their programmatic success is actually theirs and not the great principal or some other groups that are also operating on the same kids? And so we've been able to really get to a point where our data team is helping us ask important questions so that we can make the kinds of decisions that push our work forward. We were in a school stat meeting this morning, which is our sort of data meeting, where we look at information and ask good questions. And we're looking at high school graduation rates. And before, we were hopeful that high school graduation rates would rise. But now that we have clear data, we figured out that we had a significant ninth grade problem. Kids were not promoting from the ninth grade. And when you don't promote from the ninth grade, there's no way that you can graduate in 4 years. And so we put a strategy in place, ninth grade academies, and we've gone from 53% promotion rate of first-time ninth graders to 75% in 2 years, right? If you're not tracking that, right, then it doesn't move. And so, you know, we ask questions. I want to know every single senior, what are they doing next year, right? And if they are not doing something, then somebody has to do something about that. And so I think, you know, lots of people get paid, like textbooks get delivered, like things happen now that we take for granted that were not in place. But we've also upped our game to make it not just operationally functional, but to make operational things work for us in terms of pushing student achievement.
All right, so here's a thought experiment. And you don't have to go that far. You can go across the river on either side, Virginia, Maryland. I mean, they say they have charter laws, but they're basically fake charter laws. They're not for real. DC has a vigorous charter law and a vigorous sector. But say it didn't, which again, is not too far-fetched because we're bordered by 2 states like that. If there were not charters in DC, like, how would things look different now?
That's an interesting question. I think that
The other ones haven't been all the...
Oh yeah, you know, more and differentially interesting. I think what charters have helped to do is, one, they have provided parents with some options for when the school district literally was just non-responsive. And I think that's really important. I think the initial belief that the charter sector would wake DCPS up and make it compete That didn't happen for a long time, right? Like, we've had charters for about 18 years, and we're only talking about things really moving in the last 8 years. And so I think that, you know, there's pressure for sure, but for years, the district was bleeding thousands and thousands of kids, and that didn't make anybody do anything differently. I think, that being said, I think, you know, we needed to figure out a way to serve all of our young people. I think the city was sort of saying, what are we going to do? Because even if more and more kids are going to charters, like, we still have thousands upon thousands of kids in the traditional public school system, and we still have to do something about that because I don't know that, well, I will say, I don't think that charters are the panacea, right? I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that we do two different things. And in fact, if, you know, you look at New Orleans, and I think it has an interesting model that we'll continue to watch, but I think the jury is still out on that. But I think we do complementary work, or we should be doing complementary work. There are students that charter serve, there are students that DCPS serves. Sometimes they're the same students, lots of times they're not. And I think the way I think about it is we need to figure out how the two sectors not going anywhere. Charters are now such a significant portion of the public school age children. 40% of kids are in K through 12. 40% of K through 12 public school students are in charters. That it's not an experiment, it's not an innovation lab anymore. They are two vibrant sectors, and we have to figure out how these sectors work together. So I think that I guess what I'll say is, I believe that this city has a conscience, and that it was not going to just let the public school system continue to spiral out of control. And so whether it was mayoral control or Michelle Rhee, somebody would have done something, whether charters grew or didn't grow, to try to fix DC public schools.
Do you think they were a catalyst? I mean, so there had been, and you know, the charter sector back then, the quality is much more mixed than it is now, but parents were still choosing them. As you were saying, the system was bleeding families. And like, did that, I mean, some people think that it didn't create a competitive effect in terms of like what was going on in different classrooms, but it did create this disruption that sort of paved the way for pretty dramatic change.
Yeah, I mean,
once the market share actually got fairly significant. I mean, what's your read on that? That argument gets made a lot.
I think, I think to some extent, sure, right? But I think in different ways. I mean, I think teacher talent, right, became different because lots of high-performing teachers were leaving DCPS, right? I think students were leaving, but that didn't seem to be problematic for folks. I mean, I can't say that they didn't put any pressure on the district or that, whatever, but I do want to reject this narrative that, like, well, if it weren't for charters, DCPS wouldn't have improved, because I think it's much more complex than that. One, I do think that the city would have done something. Number one, and two, I actually think that it takes leadership and it takes talent within the school district. The biggest change that we've made over 8 years is in human capital, right? Ensuring that we have great teachers and great principals and people who, I mean, there were leaders who didn't care that they were bleeding. I mean, I went to a school, I'll never forget this, the first week of school in 2007, and I went to a school in my neighborhood. It was a DCPS school, it is no longer anymore. And there was a principal running around with a cordless phone because she didn't have a secretary. So if the phone rang, she had to pick it up. There were a handful of classroom teachers. She didn't have a gym teacher. She didn't have an art teacher. She didn't have a nurse. She didn't have whatever. The school was pitiful. There were 100-some kids there. And I said, where are all your kids? And she said, the charters took them. And I said, which charters? And she said, I don't know. And I said, somebody ran off with all your kids and you know where they are, right? And I say that, she's no longer employed with us, but I say that to say, apparently it wasn't pressure for some people. And so I think, I think parents having options is an important thing. But like, let's be real about it. Like, we have two very similar systems, right? Like, we don't have, for a sector that has much more flexibility than we do and whatnot. They're not wildly outperforming us, right? And I think that at the end of the day, the idea was with freedom, with flexibility, we'd see something very, very different. And I think, we see on NAEP scores, right? Like we're outperforming charters at the 4th grade level. They're outperforming us by a few points on the 8th grade level. On graduation rates, we're at 64%, they're at 70 something, 71%, right? Like it's not wild growth, right? And so I think we have some questions to ask ourselves because we have very similar systems. We both have a set of high-performing schools. We both have a set of schools that we need to turn around much more quickly. And we both have a set of schools in the middle. And I'm not sure that that was the intention, right? I actually think that we need to figure out how to radically increase the folks who are high-performing and get rid of all of the mucky middle and the bottom, because I got enough mucky middle and bottom on my side, right?
But how do we do that? I mean, the problem, it seems to me, is you've got these two sectors, as you said, and they're different, and one of them does operate, you're the default provider, they're the choice provider, and how do we have, and I was a trustee of a charter here in the city for 8 years, and I watched, we would lose kids because they were like, wait, you want me to take 5 years, in some cases maybe 6 years to get a diploma, and I can go back to Eastern, I can go to Baloo, I'm going to get it in 4, and I'm going to be with my friends. I'm not going to have to work as hard. And I mean, you can talk to kids about this stuff. And like, how do we, like, we talk about going forward in this, how does this actually work? Because just knowing, I mean, the discount rate for a 16-year-old's pretty,
Absolutely.
And
but
so
I
how
think,
do we, like, how do you actually meld those systems? And one of the things about New Orleans is you have a common set of rules because everything's, so you've got common discipline, all these kinds of things now. Like, how do we do this with these two sectors that are very different? What does that look like?
So I think common is the thing that is key, right? We have been set up to compete and not to complement, right? I think the way to think about this is we both have sets of schools and we both do different things. So let me do the things that I'm great at, and charter should do the things that they are great at, and we should fill the holes, right? But let's not act like we're both doing the same thing, right? Let's figure out, we don't do any planning. And to be really honest, there are some people who would like to plan together. There are some people who would like to figure out how we complement each other, but they've been held back by ideologues who say we don't want anybody to tell us where to go or what to do or blah, blah, blah. Nobody's talking about telling anybody what to do. It's talking about coming together and saying, how do we as a set of education providers ensure that no kid in this town does not get a full and fantastic education? And I think it's time for the grown-ups to stop all of the craziness and start figuring out how we cover this entire city.
But what does that look like? So like Scott Pearson is trying to now, basically if you want to open a school here to serve special ed kids and you've got a good charter and so forth, you're going to get fast track. They want schools like that. So that's the sort of bottom up. Like in your view, if the adults get together, like what more? What else needs to happen?
So for an example, we had last year or 2 years ago a great K-5 charter school that was coming from another place, K-5 STEM charter school. And they opened up right across the street from a K-5 DCPS charter school. Do you know how many neighborhoods there are in this city that need a K-5 STEM school, K-5 elementary school, STEM elementary school, whatever you call it, right? We should be planful. If this neighborhood has one, put it somewhere else, right? But this competition frenzy has been the narrative has been so, we compete. And to be very honest, that's not a good use of resources, and they're the city's resources, right? So why can't we figure out where are neighborhoods that don't get the kind of coverage or don't have the kinds of opportunities and work to be thoughtful about how that happens? Or for example, we've had a big conversation this year across the country about backfilling, right? You can't say to me, well, we shouldn't backfill because that's bad for some schools' culture. Well, what about my schools, right? It's bad for my school's culture to take kids in the middle of the year as well. So let's figure out, if this is what's good for kids, then let's get common about it and let's figure out how we deal with that problem. And I don't think that I think that—
And New Orleans has common rules on that.
Yeah, and I think, the citizenry in the city is saying we have to make some sense of this. So the mayor has asked the deputy mayor to convene a cross-sector collaborative to figure out how we begin to work differently.
So here's the leadership question, though. I mean, when two people introduced you today, me briefly, Sonia in more detail, and talked about how exceptional you are, which is true. So I think if someone from the charter community were sitting up here, they'd say, we can sit down with you, but like you're not going to be here forever. The mayor's not going to be here forever. How do we
I'm
know? How
calling
do we know
BS
that?
on that.
But hang on. But how do we know that this doesn't just lead to what we have seen in most places, which is sort of widespread mediocrity as these rules sort of creep back? I mean, it's a legitimate concern. If we had a Kaya Henderson everywhere, like a lot of us would be earning our living doing other things.
You've had a Kaya Henderson for 5 years and nobody's done anything about it, right? And that's longer than most superintendents have. And, you know, I take DC is a funny place. When Marion Barry got reelected as mayor and nobody wanted that to happen, they quickly changed the policy so that he didn't actually run the government, right, Greg? Right? He had tourism and recreation and whatnot. So people can change the rules when the right person is not, Parks and Rec and
I thought that was a
tourism, that's
euphemism.
all.
Okay.
Anywho, I think that if we don't begin to show, like I keep hearing about the boogeyman coming after me. First of all, the boogeyman is not coming after me. There are people in DCPS who are primed and poised to take my role on and continue the work. I think one of the things that I've learned doing this job is you can't have a bunch of different people with a bunch of different philosophies coming in to take on leadership roles, because then you get randomness in your strategy. And I think one of the reasons why we've been so successful is because we've had continuity of strategy. And so I'm very clear that when I get hit by a bus or when I need to go retire on a Caribbean island, I need to have a couple of people in place who can step into my role and who can keep the work going. But I also think that, like, there's no better time than the present. And so instead of talking about who's coming after me, you have a Kaya Henderson, and you know that I'm willing to work with people. And, you know, my experience has been every time I have reached out my hand to work with a charter on sharing a building or doing a whatever, literally, like, we have had our hands smacked, right? The project has been pushed back, the money has been taken, the whatever. And I don't stop trying, right? So.
And who's doing that smacking and taking?
Oh, there's lots of people smacking around. But I do what I do not for the people, but because it's right for kids. And so, like, we continue to work with different charters on a number of different things. Now, what I've figured out is stop telling everybody that you're working with charters, because then people get in your business.
But where I'm going, so is this just a problem with the charter sector? Is this a problem with policymakers? Is it a problem with philanthropy? Is it a problem with the education community more generally, the reform community? I mean,
I think it's a little bit of everybody. I think that, I think it's difficult for people to see how I think the narrative has become so competitive and so vitriolic and so charters or traditional that I don't think people see a way to come back together. And I think there are a few of us who do see a way. Sometimes you have to diverge in order to converge. And I think that there are amazing educators across this city in both sectors who, when they sit together and put kids at the forefront, can come up with the right solutions.
so one more question, then I want to start to bring in the eye of two sort of more personal questions that I know you'll hate. But first one that you'll probably hate slightly less. How do you respond to critics who say they look at the NAEP scores and so forth and they say this is demographics? The city's demographics are changing. I mean, Sonia gave a little bit of voice to that in her introduction and so forth, but like, I want to hear, what is your response? Because you hear that a lot. You heard it in the wake of this last round of NAEP scores. How do you respond to that?
So my first response is, if you look at the data, it's actually not factually correct. And Mike Chancellor, who's sitting there from the Council for Great City Schools, I'm not the data chick, right? And so we have other people analyze our data and help us understand, if you hold things constant, what it looks like. The demographic changes in DCPS are actually, I think, different than a lot of people understand. We've had an increase in our white population for sure. If you look at where that increase is, it's been at the pre-K levels, pre-K through 2, and the vast increases over the last couple of years haven't hit our testing cohort yet. The real demographic changes, which lots of people don't uncover, are socioeconomic. And the biggest loss that we've taken in demographic changes are of middle-class African Americans. And so for a long time, those were the people who were helping us pull whatever scores we had. And so I'm especially proud that in a time where a lot of them are choosing other options for whatever reasons, we're still increasing when our population is more at risk than it has ever been before, when our population continues to grow on the English language front, where we're just facing a more complex set of demographic issues. But it's not like there's a busload of wealthy white kids who are, goosing our scores.
Now, when you talk about that demographic, are you losing them geographically to other communities, or are you losing them to different choice options in the city?
I think both.
Both.
We see a lot of mobility between DC and Prince George's County. In fact, one of the things that we've had to figure out how to do is go to Prince George's County with a list of our kids and say, hey, have you seen these kids? Because literally,
Right.
they go back and forth. We also see our middle-class African-American families choosing charters. And if that works for them, great. But we're studying the issue and trying to ensure that I think the challenge for us is we don't get to serve some families or some students, right? We serve all students. That's our mission. And creating a portfolio of schools that serves everybody's students is much more challenging than serving a handful of folks or a certain kind of interest group. But it's who we are as a public school system, and we're going to continue to do that.
So 2 personal questions. Just one, I mean, you've succeeded here, and so as a result, you've emerged as a very high-profile leader. There's a lot of great leaders around the sector, a lot of great leaders of color, a lot of great female leaders, but you're, I think, arguably now the highest-profile African-American woman in education. And, I mean, you have the respect of a lot of people. People pay attention to you. What you say matters. People respond to it. Like, how is that, like, over the last decade, this transition, how is that? What have you learned, and like, how do you? I mean, that's a, with that, there's a responsibility that comes with that. How do you wear that?
Yes, a little uncomfortably, to be very honest with you. I do the work, and I never set out to be a national voice on whatever. I'm happy to share what we've learned and how we do what we do because I care about kids across, the country. But it makes me uncomfortable because I'm just regular Kaya, right? And Saturday nights are sometimes dinner at your house, but sometimes at the neighborhood bar. And so And so sometimes I look at the chick on the video and I'm like, wow, I saw the video yesterday for the first time and I was like, wow, that school district looks pretty impressive.
Yeah, she's pretty put together, yeah.
So sometimes I feel like I'm having an out-of-body experience, but my hope is that I can accurately communicate both what we're doing, why we're doing it, to be motivating to other people. I do believe that other people can do this. We're not unicorns and we're not smarter than anybody else around the place. There are some very clear things that need to be done in a particular order and we can help people do that. And so I want to help and I want to be the voice that, as Sonia said, reminds people that our kids can do it, right? Our kids can do it. And this narrative around broken kids and broken communities is garbage, right? And so I want to remind people that when you don't believe that about kids and when you start operating differently, that you can see the kind of results that we're seeing.
So at some point, somebody else will have to do this, and you're young, and you now can, because you've been successful, can do lots of things. I'm not asking you what your next job is, but what's the bucket list? What are a couple of things that professionally you really hope to do?
I have been thinking about this. So this might surprise you, but I would like to have a TV show.
You got to start. You got to start somewhere.
I actually think that we're not, the conversations about education in this country are so whack and they're driven by people who are not doing the work or who haven't done the work. and or who aren't from the communities that we're serving and whatnot. And I think we need a different discourse around education. And so I want kind of a Melissa Harris Perry style show, really focused on education, where we're able to bring different segments, policymakers, community members, partners, whoever, to talk about the complexities of this work and great ideas and best practices and that kind of thing.
That's great.
That's what I want to do.
That's awesome. Anything else? That's
Someday.
a big.
Yeah, I want to sit on a beach in the Caribbean honestly, for real. I mean, this work is really, like, I love it every single day, but every single day, like, it eats a piece of my soul, right? And so there's gonna have to be some, like, downtime after this. To build back up a little bit, and you like give, and my poor family who, like, I come home at night and people are like, Kaya, and I'm like, don't talk to me, right? I have nothing left, and so you need some time to replenish and to refuel, but then I'll be back.
All right. I thought you were also going to say something like guest coach the Hoyas or something like that.
Oh,
yeah.
no,
No?
So here's one thing that I really learned. This is a big leadership lesson. So, like, you see your favorite basketball team and you're like, what is the coach doing? Blah, 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 right? And now, like, because people are like, what is the superintendent doing? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Now I don't criticize other leaders for anything because you have no idea about what they are facing. So I have a lot of sympathy for coaches, for presidents, for all kinds of stuff, and I keep my mouth shut.
Yeah, it is. All this stuff is harder than it looks. All right. We've got plenty of time for questions. There's actually a roving mic right back here with Michelle, so if you can put your hand up. Great. And since we are on video, even if you're known to Kaya or to me or both of us, if you could introduce yourself and, And I think one thing, this is Washington, I guess, and this is not directed at you, just in general. This is Washington, and sometimes, like, question is kind of an elusive phrase here. So we're thinking of them for this activity more in, like, the sense of, like, the interrogative rather than the expository kind of question.
Got it. Thank you. Kurt Einmacher with Cisco. Kaya, you talked about collaborating and ways to find how you can work together with the charter school system. You talked about some of the best things that DCPS does and the best things that the charter school system does. Give us some examples of the blend of those two, if you would.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that we've learned from charters is that many of our young people just need more time in school. And so we've seen our charter partners who have longer school days and longer school years, and they've been able to be flexible and that kind of thing. And I think that's a lesson that we've learned from them. I think one of the lessons that we were able to share together is a common lottery. We all had lots of different lotteries. DCPS had a great big lottery. And in fact, parents were lotterying all over the place. We were able to come together and work on a common lottery that now everybody sort of is able to do. I think DCPS has pioneered some things around teacher compensation, around teacher retention. I think one of the things that I hear some of my charter partners lament is the turnover rate. And I think we have some things to teach folks about teacher retention. I think we have some things to teach folks about how to use data. And I think people don't generally think about us that way, but I think we're two different types of organizations. We're a big bureaucratic thing, right, that isn't easy to turn, but we also have the sort of ability to do some things over the longer term and with some support. So one of the things that I'm really proud of is our curriculum, and we have a number of charter partners who don't have the capability to generate their own curriculum. And so sharing professional development. Both of us are good at different types of professional development. We invite each other to each other's professional development, but I think looking for cross-pollinating opportunities is something that we have to do more of.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? I'm always struck. Impact has not traveled, and yet, I mean, the evaluations show it's working, the stuff you shared with us today. It hasn't traveled, and some of the things that have happened here with teachers have been enormously controversial and caused all kinds of acrimony in other places. Like, like, what's going on? Are you the teacher union whisperer, or like how have you how has this happened here without what we see in a lot of other places?
So I'd say that impact has in fact traveled. It just hasn't traveled under the same brand because the brand is toxic, right? When you think about what happened here in order for impact to move forward, it was an angry time. And we have moved through it, but right after we created impact, Gates gave 3 districts roughly $40 million apiece to create teacher evaluation systems, and all 3 districts called us and said, can we just buy impact, right? And we didn't have a mechanism to sell it, but but we literally have held conferences to teach people how to do what we've done
But when
year
you dig
over
into
year.
that data, you don't see the results that you're getting here. You don't see that. You see
Well,
you see a lot of money getting spent. In some cases, a replication of what was there before. You're being
But I
modest.
think, but I know.
I'm sure there were great conferences.
I
but-
think no, and people come and whatnot. But I think what happens is, you have to customize your system for your place. And I think in each place, different negotiations were made and whatnot, some good, some not so good. And so I think you see different results because you can't just pick up our system and drop it into someplace else. But I think that, you got to keep your eye on the prize and figure out what is most important to you and whether or not you're willing to go through the fire in order to keep some certain things. And I think other people, might have made some compromises that didn't keep to the integrity of the tool. And I think there's a readiness factor, right? Every school district is not ready to implement a different teacher evaluation system. And it's not just about teacher evaluation. It's also about the professional development that goes along with it. Because if you've got a teacher evaluation system, but you don't have a way to grow teachers, then teachers are angry, right? And so I think there are pieces that need to be put in place, and I think in part because of Race to the Top and because of all of this policy talk about teacher evaluation, we rush to just pull the teacher evaluation lever. And you can't pull any one lever in isolation. There are things that go along with that lever. And so I think we've tried to help people understand it's not just impact. It is impact plus a curriculum plus professional development plus changing the structures in the school day so that teachers have time to work and plan together and all of these kinds of things. And some people said, all right, cool. And some people said, nah, I'll just take impact. And so,
And how much of a compensation? We hire some of your teachers when they're ready to do something else. And if they've been effective on impact and they're teaching in a high-need school,
you can't afford them.
they in some cases, they want to come in an analyst role, they have to take a pay cut, which is that's how it should be. That's like how
Amen.
that's how we all hope the world would work, right? Not the pay, but you get my point that teachers are that well paid.
Yeah.
So how much of that how much, and that has not traveled elsewhere? That sort of really radical differentiation.
Yeah, again, I was talking to my team today and I was like, if you want radical change, you have to be bold. And if you keep doing the same thing the same way, you're going to get the same thing. And I think there are some people who looked at the work that we did and said, oh my God, DC is burning. I don't want any of that. We have a nice little school community. It's all good. So what? We're not moving as fast, but I don't want the war that was DCPS. And I get that. But we had to go through war in order to get to the other side and get some transformation. And so I think my message to superintendents is you got to figure out what a few key levers are that you need to pull that are going to have a transformative effect, and they're going to hurt. This is not a tea party. If it was easy, somebody would have done it already. But you got to be bold and do it. And so we made a couple big bets, and they're paying off.
All right. You need a different metaphor than that Tea Party one these days.
Oh, yeah.
I think everybody got the point. Yeah, sir.
I'm Gregory McCarthy with the Washington Nationals Baseball Club and DC Public Library. You've inspired the city, Kaya, by being a change agent over the last 5 years. Are there any thresholds where you think your agenda will morph, if you will, from being a reform agenda to a continuous improvement agenda? Will there be a place where you can say, I can stop lighting fires and now I'm just going to continuously improve?
Yeah, I think we're already there. I hope that I don't think I'm running around lighting many fires these days. I think that we've been able to help people understand what we're doing and why we're doing it in a logical and sequential way. And so people kind of get where we're going and they're willing to go with us. You know, gone are the days when I was like, oh gosh, I have a community meeting tonight, right? Because it meant somebody was going to scream at me. I don't have those anymore. And I think people feel a sense of momentum and feel success. And when people are feeling success, then they're willing to go a little harder and go a little further and keep pushing. And so I do feel like we've gone from broken district in need of radical transformation to halfway decent district that, you know, now needs to put, you know, map out the path to greatness. And with this sense of accomplishment behind us, people believe that we can. And so my job is to keep on pushing us to that.
Other questions?
Catherine Brown with the Center for American Progress. You've made amazing strides in DC, and now it's sort of roughly at the national average with respect to NAEP, and that's a tremendous accomplishment to you. But I'm wondering, what do we do to, what's your next step? How are we going to actually vault students so that not just a third of our students are on grade level for reading and math?
Yeah, so I think that I am a firm believer in the Common Core standards. I'm a firm believer in rigorous academic curriculum. Let me tell you something about Black people in education in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. used to be the place where Black people all across the country would come to get a phenomenal education. It is the seat of the first public high school for African Americans in this country. Why? Because you had Howard University, and you had really smart Black people who couldn't get a job anywhere else, and so they taught. They taught in DC public schools. And so you had exacting professors who were teaching kids. You had teachers who were holding kids to incredibly high standards. And you can't tell me that these kids weren't poor, that they weren't victims of institutional racism, that they were all of the ills that our young people are facing today. They were under-resourced, they were using textbooks that were hand-me-downs, all of that. Yet and still they produced Nobel Prize winners. They produced, you know, leaders from, you know, all kinds of industry. And we can do that again if we stop making excuses for our young people and start radically improving the people who we put in front of them, right? And holding our kids to high academic standards. Do we have to support them? Yes. And were those teachers helping their young people? Absolutely. And we have great partners across the city. I mean, one of the things that I feel really lucky about is I have partners who are city agencies, nonprofit organizations, our sports teams, everybody. What can I do to help? And I think for years, we couldn't even articulate what people could do to help us. But I think we have a clear sense of what we are supposed to do, and we have to get really good at teaching and learning, right? People knock me upside the head because I say food is not our core competency. If somebody knows how to do food, why should I spend my time trying to figure out how to do food? I gotta get really good at teaching and learning, right? And school districts right now have to be everything to everybody. If we can continue to focus, the thing that has allowed us to have this success is we've been able to focus on teaching and learning. And if we can continue to move our teachers to different ways of teaching and different standards, if we can continue to move our students through rigorous curriculum, I think that we can get there. I think that we can get there.
I saw a second hand over here, yeah. Okay.
Dakari Aarons from the Data Quality Campaign. I was really struck by your comment when you were talking about school closings, about the district did not have all of the data it needed to make the decision, but that communities also had data that was important that you needed to use. Could you talk a little bit more about what sort of data communities have that you used, and how do you do that, not just for school closings, but in other aspects of DCPS work?
Absolutely. So, you know, we know which schools are underutilized because we can tell what building utilization rates are, and we can tell, you know, what population patterns are going to look like because we partner with the Office of Planning, and, you know, we can tell where new housing is coming online and those kinds of things. But communities can tell you things like, well, if you close this middle school, it will mean there's only one middle school in Ward 8. And since you closed 3 middle schools in 2008, it means all of the neighborhoods in Ward 8 would converge in one middle school, and we'd have a powder keg. Important data. We'll keep that middle school open, right? or transportation issues, or, you know, this is the role that this school plays in the community. We were closing River Terrace, and there's a significant senior population in River Terrace, and it's where they have their senior citizens meetings, it's where they have their civic association meetings. There's no gathering place in that community. There are no businesses in that community. There's nothing but homes. And so we said, okay, we're gonna close the school, but we're gonna keep this part open so that you can continue to have your community meetings. We're gonna rebuild the school, and we'll rebuild you a community wing so that you can continue to have your meetings and do whatever you need to do in the community. I think the first thing that you have to do is trust and believe that your community is a valuable partner. And when you believe that and you start talking to them, you figure out that they know a whole lot of stuff that you don't know. And when you put it all together, you come up with better solutions. And so that happened when we had to do the closings. And then we had this other big, hairy problem that nobody had touched since the late 60s, which was the boundaries and feeder pattern process. And superintendents far and wide were afraid to touch it because it brings out racial tensions and socioeconomic tensions and stuff. And said, look, we can't keep on doing this. We got to tackle it. And so we said, we'll do the same sort of process. And what we did was we took all of the data that we had, the population data, the mobility data, all of this stuff, and put it out to the community. We put it on websites. We gave it out in meetings, whatever. And we said, this is what we have to do. How are we going to do this together? And we put together a task force, a group of people who worked with us over the course of a year and a half to come up with a set of recommendations on how we should move forward. And I'm so proud of this because they made their recommendations in the middle of the mayoral campaign. And every candidate was like, oh, you know, I'm going to change the boundary and feeder pattern recommendations because they felt like that was the in vogue thing to do. And the Post did a poll, and 60-some% of residents said, do not change, said to the whoever would be mayor, do not change the boundary and feeder recommendations. These are the decisions that we made for our school. When the community owns the decision, these are not my boundary and feeder decisions. This is what the community decided that it wants for its schools. There are some decisions that I disagree with, but these are not my schools. These are our schools. And so we have to own the problems together, and we have to own the solutions together.
Michelle, did you say a hand? Are there any other questions? All right, I will leave you with one. So your friend, my friend, John King, is coming in at Ed, assuming he's been there, assuming a new role there soon. In terms of what you've learned here with urban districts, the levers that the federal government can actually realistically pull, like, what do you hope, it's only a year, but what do you hope to see happen? What kind of groundwork, what do you want to see the federal government do going forward to make what you're doing here either easier or help other places be more transformative?
No comment. No, I'll be very honest with you. I have tried my best to stay out of the national conversation. The role of the feds, I don't really know. And we were at a conference some months ago where we were debating what should happen next with ESEA, and I was shopping online, full disclosure, because I was a little bored with the conversation.
Okay. I was sticking pencils in my eye. So.
And I got cold called. Kaya, what do you think the feds should do about it? And I was like, well, to be really honest, that's not what drives my work. I don't do what I do because the feds have mandated it or because, you know, it's tied to how I get money. In fact, we did teacher evaluation before the feds started on the teacher evaluation front. And, you know, maybe I'm lucky because I live in this bubble, but we've been really good at just trying to do what we think is good and right for kids. I don't know what the role of the federal government is in education. Maybe in a little while I'll have some thoughts about that. I think that there has been a lot of good that has been done by surfacing some of the strategies and some of the issues that we need to confront. I think there's also been some unintended consequences that have happened. Does that mean that we should stop trying? No. But it means that we've got to get smarter about what we think the federal role is. I'm worried because I feel like the Congress will take this as a sign that the feds should have no role in education and really curtail the powers of the secretary. And so bless John King's heart for doing this for a year, but the whoever the next secretary is, I think, is going to have a hard row to hoe. But I think it is worth, I think we've got to figure it out. I don't have an easy answer on that one.
All right. If I heard that answer right, I thought I heard a little dog whistle in there, too. So I will leave you guys, we're just about out of time. I'll leave you with a thought. A little bit earlier, Kaya was talking about bold leadership and was saying, in the context of the impact discussion, bold leadership. And I would just leave you with the thought that bold leadership looks different in different settings and it comes in different flavors, but this city certainly has it on schools right now and is very lucky to. So I know I speak for a lot of people when I say thank you, not just for being here today, but more generally, thank you.